good afternoon. Thank you very much for this kind introduction and for the invitation. So what I would like to do is to give you my kind of a personal view of where do we stand and where we can go in terms of medical research. If I try to do a very quick, rapid, historical vision of research in medicine, it started with human beings, actually. There has been recently a publication with a very small picture on the slide that 31,000 years ago, so in the Paleolithic time, people were able to do an amputation. And we know that the person who had the part of his leg put down had survived many years. So imagine 31,000 years ago it was done. So, but things have moved from observation and empirism, which is still present, obviously, to experimentation with the 19th century, Claude Bernard and others. They developed a very important point that was we can test hypotheses by experience. And the 20th century, I think, has been marked by the progressive introduction into medicine, into research in medicine of the other sciences, mathematics, computer science, and obviously now artificial intelligence, but also physics, chemistry, and obviously biology. And I think we are moving these days, once past a phase of analytical evaluation of events, of biological processes and diseases, to something more integrated. And I think that what is developing now is systems biology, and systems biology applied to medicine, thanks in part to artificial intelligence on top on all of these scientific contributions. So this is leading to what is now proposed everywhere, but still not yet fully applied, that is precision medicine. So let me illustrate it with a few examples. In terms of biology, one very key aspect is structure of molecules, and of course, structure of proteins is an important one. It started exactly 64 years ago with Sir John Kendrew in Cambridge, who developed, he was a physicist, he developed an X-ray diffraction method to study the structure, the 3D structure of the first protein, myoglobin. Now, 60 years later, we are there, thanks to the progress in imaging, so physics, and artificial intelligence by the so-called AlphaFold program and deep learning based on the crystal structure of a certain number of proteins. It's now possible to predict the structure of virtually any protein, and I give you here a nice example about the complex of proteins that form the pore between the nucleus and the cytoplasm of cells. This is just fantastic. And today, it is estimated that we can predict at least the three-dimensional structure of something like 200 million proteins of the life world. This is extremely impressive. This can be confirmed by crystallography and physical analysis, but it's a fantastic example. Now, if we move to medicine, therapeutics, an obvious aspect that is coming is the integration of multiple data from imaging of patients, pathology, the various omics, and the environment. I took this picture from a recent review of Eric Topol, who is a pioneer in this field, working in the US. On the left-hand side of this slide, you can read, I hope, the different parameters that can be analyzed for every single individual, if it is possible. From obviously omics to analysis of metabolites, the microbiota, so bacteria and viruses with which we are living, and so on on the environment. And on the right-hand side panel, you see all of the potential applications for clinical trials, but also prediction of outcome of a given therapeutic in a given individual, for instance, by developing digital twins. So there are many examples I will not detail here in this context, but this is promising, though not yet, as it stands on this slide, implemented. We are still far from there, but this is obviously an important direction where we are moving. In therapeutics, and this is obvious, the development of drugs, based on chemical molecules, has been fantastic over the last 50, 70 years, and now AI is contributing also to their definition. But I'd like to move one step further and to discuss something which is closer to my field. These are bioreagents. So over the last 20, 25 years, there has been, I think, a real revolution in medicine, that is the usage of biological products to treat diseases. It started with insulin for diabetic patients, but one of the most striking examples are antibodies. As you know, antibodies are natural proteins you can find in your blood, in your tissues, that protect us against microbes like COVID or others. And these can be engineered in vitro. We can make cells in bioreactors to produce antibodies, all with the same specificity. And there are several ways of doing it. They are shown on this slide. Of course, I'm not going to detail them. But this has been applied now to treat many diseases with great success. Diseases like inflammatory disease, like rheumatoid arthritis, which is quite common, or inflammatory bowel disease, or psoriasis, and many others are now treated with a very high level of efficacy by such molecules. And this is also now developed in the field of cancer. You may have heard about the antibodies that enhance immune responses against cancer cells, the so-called checkpoint inhibitors. But now one can engineer antibodies to bridge cells of the immune system to cancer cells so that they are going to kill these cancer cells. So this is a prodigious field where there are advances occurring quite often in these days. This is really impressive. I'm sorry, I'm reviewing things very quickly, but just to give you a kind of an overview. Now, another field that is burgeoning is cell and tissue therapy. This started approximately 70 years ago with the advent of organ transplantation and bone marrow transplantation, that are procedures able to cure dozens of thousands of patients, but this is now becoming more sophisticated by the possibility to grow tissues ex vivo, even probably in the years to come to do bioprinting, that is really to reconstitute some tissues, at least the skin, the keratinocytes we do today already. We globally, not myself, not a dermatologist, but probably we are going to reconstitute tissue in a more complex area in 3D with different kind of cells. So by bioprinting, we can, and by using, as shown on the left-hand side, the middle panel, use stem cells. So from multiple organs, there are naturally occurring stem cells. One can grow in vitro to expand the cells and differentiate them in different tissues, and one can even engineer stem cells as developed by Yamanaka in Japan some years ago. So it's a very important field of development, though it has not yet reached, with the important exception of the skin, medical applications. And other fields that are developing are the use in therapeutics of DNA and RNA. So DNA-based therapy is gene therapy. So the principle, as shown on this cartoon, for genetic diseases where there is a mutation, so something abnormal in a gene, this is the red dot you can see on the cell on the top, is to come with a vector, which is a kind of a virus usually, to provide the cell with a piece of DNA that will integrate or will stay into the cells and will provide the cell with the normal copy of the protein that is defective in the patients. This gene therapy that started approximately 25 years ago is now a reality. As you can read, there are today more than 15 inherited diseases, rather rare, but still affecting the immune system, the blood, like sickle cell disease, which is not so rare, by the way, eye diseases, diseases of metabolism, neurological disease of the central nervous system, for which such therapeutics has been demonstrated to provide a clear-cut and long-standing benefit for patients. So this is a reality, and also a reality that is applied in the context of cancer, leukemias and lymphomas with the so-called CAR T cells that are lymphocytes, so cells of the immune system that are modified by gene transfer to express a protein so that they can kill the leukemic or the lymphoma cells. So this is a reality that has led now that there are 11 drugs that are on the market. But we may do better in the future. Now, if you consider the right-hand side part of this slide, so which is related to the previous one, where the strategy is different, but more complex, but more elegant. That is, instead of adding a piece of genetic material, of genetic information, you will do kind of gene surgery and will modify the genome so that you will fix the abnormality, you will fix the mutation. This has not yet been achieved in patients. that has been achieved in cells, that has been achieved in animal models, not yet in patients, and there are even more sophisticated technologies. I will not describe them here, the so-called base editing and prime editing. The interest of them is that by doing so, we may reduce toxicity by avoiding any breaks into the DNA. It's not a good idea to break the DNA because that can cause all kinds of damage, including cancer. But still, this is very elegant, very exciting, but the proof of principle of the efficacy of these strategies is not yet provided. Another piece of significant advance that comes from biotechnology and mostly chemistry is the creation of these nanocapsules. I put here the name of Peter Cullis, who is a chemist working in Canada. He has developed these small nanoparticles. They have the size of more or less of a virus that can contain any therapeutic material you'd like to inject, to administer to a patient. Here is the example of the RNA vaccine for COVID, because these nanocapsules have been used with success. And the trick here is that he has integrated so-called ionizable lipids, or modified lipids, that make the delivery of the material, RNA in this example, within cells without destruction of this material. So this is a very important advance that will be used not only to administer RNA, but also DNA, proteins, and other regions. So still there are, despite these advances, a number of challenges ahead of us in medicine. Just a few are listed here. There are more. We do not do well with degenerative diseases, as you know, neurodegenerative diseases, but not only neurodegenerative diseases. Mental health diseases are poorly treatable these days. We still understand little about them, so we need some basic research. Genetic diseases, genetic rare diseases, despite the advances I've mentioned. I mentioned successes for 15 diseases, but there are something like 7,000 others still without a therapy. Cancer, obviously, despite advances, remains a major cause of death. And then there is the long list of behavioral and environmental related diseases like obesity, diabetes, addiction, allergy, inflammation, and autoimmunity, infections with, of course, the risk of pandemics, and the additional problem for bacteria of resistance to antibiotics, and pollution by fine particles and others. So the list is long, which means that there is a lot to do in the future to improve health and healthcare. But now I'd like to switch gear a little bit to say biotechnology based on science and even basic science is absolutely critical to advance in medicine, but alone it is not going to work. I think we have to consider another very important aspect, that is social science. And just give you a few examples. Some of these things I'm going to mention now are obvious, but I think from time to time it's good to mention them. And whatever the best biotechnology we'll have, whether we have the capacity of having all of the possible information about a given patient and with biosensors to monitor his glucose or any other aspect for a given disease, this is not going to replace what is the single bond and discussion, open discussion between a doctor and the patient. And we know that one major issue in medicine that doesn't sound very scientific is the observance of treatment. Most of the patients with chronic diseases, one day, sooner or later, they are going to interrupt the treatment. So even if it's extremely sophisticated, by definition, this is no longer going to work. So it's absolutely key to preserve, actually, to improve as much as we can, the single colloquium between patient and doctor. And of course, that has to be proceeded with empathy. Never think that biotechnology is going to replace this basic, absolutely basic aspect of medicine. But there are other aspects to consider, to my opinion. One is acceptability of advances. And I will give you two examples. This could be at the individual level, but that can occur. This is, of course, even worse if a population, as a society, doesn't want to refuse a given treatment or a prevention measure or prediction measure. And another aspect I will illustrate briefly afterwards is there is now a trend in part of the society, including among scientists, to consider that we should refrain innovation, because this may be harmful. So let's illustrate the first aspect with vaccine, which is an obvious field in which acceptability is key in order to have vaccination to protect the population against a given infection. I remind you that this kind of anti-vax movement have occurred since the very beginning of vaccination, that is the end of the 18th century with Jenner for the vaccine. But for instance, if you look at the cartoon from 1900 in UK, at the time where the vaccine against the smallpox mentioned earlier today, the vaccination was promoted, even made compulsory. So this kind of cartoon was designed, showing, as you can see, a dead body injecting death actually to a child. So a way, of course, to fight against vaccination. And in the context of the present COVID pandemics, we had, for instance, this movement of the truck people in Canada blocking the street of Ottawa, and or this kind of cartoon you can see that were on the streets of Paris recently against vaccination. So this is important to consider. This has to be understood. It goes with fake news. So it's related to what you mentioned in terms of social science and assessment of these problems and how to fight them. But this is a very important issue. So the issue of restraining science and research, at least. I took that example. I'm sorry, this is in French, but there is just a small piece of sentence to be translated. This is a paper written by a psychiatrist, who, by the way, is an excellent, fantastic psychiatrist. So it's really someone smart. So he has written this tribune in the journal Le Monde recently. You can see the title, La médecine est le meilleur alibi de l'hubris techno-scientifique. So saying that one says too much hype about technical developments, and it goes up to what I put into the right rectangle, that technomedicine might be just a fake. So this kind of people, and this is coming. I'm sure you have heard about such things. And I think this is a problem. This has to be, we have to go to talk to these people, and we have to explain to the population that science still has a word to say globally in society, and specifically, obviously, in healthcare. I'm almost done, but two aspects still. Besides acceptability, there is accessibility of innovations in medicine. Everyone, ethically speaking, we want to have a given new development in medicine to be usable by absolutely everyone. And this is very difficult, as you know. There are large, even today, even in the French system, which is, thanks to the social security, accessible to almost, I would say, everyone. But even so, we know that there are inequalities, and not talking about what's going on everywhere else in the world. The problem of cost, if we consider the cost of health, it represented approximately 2% of the GDP in 1950, and today is up to close to actually 12%. So this is quite amazing, and what will be the future on that? Can we afford to spend that much amount of money? And as you will see in a second, the innovation is extremely expensive, because the innovative therapies, I will show you the example for gene therapy, but it's also the case for drugs, the antibodies I mentioned earlier, or a fantastic chemical used in the context of a rare disease named cystic fibrosis. They are all extremely expensive. This is the example of five products that are marketed in gene therapy. You have the price in red per patient. This is very high. It doesn't account for the cost itself. So the question is, and for the CAR T cells now, there are more than 10,000 patients treated worldwide, so the market is pretty big. It's only a beginning. So the question is, there will be more. Of course, we want to have more, not only 5 or 6. We want to have 100, 200, 500 of these products in the near future. But is it affordable and unsustainable? At that level, the answer is no. And if we have to think all together, the industry, of course, the political leaders, the society, we have to consider these issues very seriously. And to finish with, there are obviously ethical questions. The ethical challenges in the context of AI are obvious about the maintenance of privacy. This is I'm not an expert, I think an important issue to consider. And also I'd like to remind you, something you know, but from time to time it's good to repeat it, that with medicine we want to treat patients, to cure diseases, to improve health, the quality of life. We want to prevent disease, but to my opinion, we should not think of augmenting men, as we can hear from time to time, which, by the way, scientifically speaking, is not really serious, but philosophically speaking, I think it's even worse. So I will finish there and just showing you this cartoon I got from a Japanese colleague, which I think is a good summary of what I tried to mention. So this is these are doctors, at least on the left-hand side, we're talking about a patient, and they are mice doctors. We need the mice doctors, that is, we need, of course, the science closely together to work to develop the new medicine. But the mice, of course, these are also the computers. So we have the computers, mice, together, and this is the way to go. But not forgetting that we are human beings, and we have to be considered as human beings, and so we need the social sciences to understand how do we behave individually and collectively. Thank you very much for your attention.